Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking what I think is one of the most fascinating paradoxes in modern hardware. We're looking at this wild idea that to solve some of our biggest, most massive global technological bottlenecks, we actually have to go impossibly small. Like, we're talking about fundamentally breaking the established rules of miniaturization. So let's dive into this with a frustration literally all of us have experienced. Have you ever felt your smartphone just legitimately heat up in your hand after a heavy session of multitasking? Or maybe you've watched your battery percentage completely fall off a cliff at the exact worst possible moment? Yeah, it happens to all of us. But the core reason for this isn't just a degraded battery. It actually traces directly back to the physical limits of current hardware architecture. You see, as your electronic circuits and memory operate, they're boxed in by a strict thermal envelope. They relentlessly consume power, and as a totally inescapable byproduct, they generate heat. Which brings us to part one, the smartphone heat problem. To really understand why your phone suddenly turns into a hand warmer, we have to look at the physics of traditional computer memory. Standard memory architectures need constant state switching and this continuous electrical current just to hold on to data. Because electricity is constantly being pushed through these materials, you get this thing called Joule heating. Basically, the kinetic energy of moving electrons gets converted right into thermal energy, or heat. And this intrinsic heating inevitably results in a massive parasitic drain on your battery. Hardware engineers have known for a long time that if they could just design memory that avoids this continuous current, it would completely revolutionize the energy demands of our phones, our servers, pretty much all modern computing. And that exact issue drove engineers straight into our second topic, the limits of shrinking. Historically, the semiconductor industry's answer to getting more efficient was actually pretty simple. Just shrink it. Make the components physically smaller, pack more of them onto a single chip, and boom, they should use less power, right? Well, they hit a massive brick wall, a miniaturization wall, to be exact. They found that traditional materials used for memory simply degraded as they were scaled down. So instead of getting more efficient, the physical degradation got worse the smaller they went. They started seeing all of these unacceptable electrical leaks and weird quantum tunneling effects. For a long time, it really seemed like the laws of solid-state physics had just set a hard, undeniable limit on how far this tech could go. Honestly, the journey to actually solving this took decades. We're talking a massive 40-year gap just because of these physical limitations. It all started way back in 1971, when researchers proposed this concept called a ferroelectric tunnel junction. The idea was to use a material's internal electric polarization to store data without needing continuous power. It was an absolutely elegant theory, but they basically had to abandon it. The industry just didn't have materials that could pull this off at such a tiny scale. Fast forward to 2011, and we finally hit the jackpot, a huge material science discovery. Scientists realized that a common industrial compound, hafnium oxide, could actually keep its special properties even when sliced ultra-thin. And that was the exact missing puzzle piece that set the stage for a gigantic breakthrough in May 2026 at Science Tokyo. That brings us to part three, a tiny, rule-breaking solution. Building on that hafnium oxide discovery, Professor Yutaka Majima and his team at Science Tokyo decided to just tackle that miniaturization wall head-on. And what's so incredibly fascinating here is their sheer audacity. They didn't just ignore conventional engineering wisdom. They actively bet against standard models of solid-state physics, models that insisted shrinking memory any further would utterly destroy it. They set out to challenge those limits by building an ultra-small memory device unlike literally anything attempted before. 25 nanometers. Seriously, let that scale sink in for a second. To put that into perspective, this memory device they built is roughly 1/3000th the thickness of a single human hair. We are talking about manipulating matter at a level where traditional physics starts giving way to quantum weirdness. It is unimaginably small, and making it requires a staggering, almost impossible level of precision.
But getting down to that size requires overcoming part four, solving the leakage challenge. When you shrink memory down to the nanoscale, you introduce a catastrophic physical problem. Electrical current inherently wants to leak out, and it specifically leaks through the boundaries between tiny crystals in the material. Think of it like a microscopic mosaic. The cracks between those tiles are the crystal boundaries. At 25 nanometers, electrons just slip right through those cracks, rendering traditional memory totally useless. This exact leakage is the culprit that stopped miniaturization dead in its tracks for years.
So how on earth did Professor Majima's team fix it? Well, instead of fighting the leakage with traditional insulators, they changed the actual way they built the thing. They created a new method where they heated the electrodes during fabrication, causing them to naturally form this really distinct semicircular shape. That specific structural geometry fundamentally changes the material. It effectively minimizes those problematic cracks or boundaries, forcing the hafnium oxide to act almost like one single, unified crystal. And with fewer microscopic boundaries, you drastically choke off the paths for the electricity to leak out. And this is where the paradigm totally flips. The old assumption, the conventional wisdom, was that shrinking components inherently increases leakage and ruins performance. But their new discovery proved an incredible irony. Going to an extreme, ultra-small scale paired with that semicircular design was the exact mechanism they needed to eliminate those crystal boundaries. They didn't just mitigate the problem. Driving the device down to 25 nanometers actually reduced the structural imperfections. It completely overturned a long-held assumption, proving that in this highly specific case, smaller wasn't just a byproduct of efficiency, it was the direct cause of better performance. Which leads us to part 5, powering the future. It is so cool to think about what this tiny, rule-breaking chip actually means for our everyday lives. Because when a technological bottleneck of this magnitude gets shattered, the ripple effects across the entire tech industry are going to be immediate and absolutely massive.
We're essentially looking at a completely new era of ultra-efficient hardware. Imagine wearing a smartwatch that you don't have to charge every night, but instead it runs for months on a single charge. Or think about fast networks of connected sensors, the backbone of our smart cities, operating for years without needing expensive battery swaps. Crucially, this also paves the way for way faster, ultra-low energy processing for artificial intelligence directly on our devices, which right now is a huge power drain. And honestly, the absolute best part of all of this? This breakthrough relies on hafnium oxide, which is already totally compatible with the manufacturing lines we use today. So rolling this out into our everyday electronics isn't some pipe dream that's decades away. It can happen remarkably fast.
Professor Majma perfectly summed up the whole mindset behind this breakthrough. He said, challenging what seem to be the limits of science, such as we cannot make things any smaller, or they will break if we do, is like walking in the dark. It is a continuous struggle. However, by questioning traditional assumptions, we were able to discover an entirely new perspective. It's just a fantastic reminder that true innovation often means actively rejecting what everyone else considers to be settled science. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. If a fundamental rule of miniaturization can be entirely rewritten by just a single structural shift in perspective, what other scientific limits are out there right now just waiting to be broken? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the limits around you.